to look at from the Sufi point of view, what the heart of Islam is. What is, when you consider the many literalist and restricted presentations and ideas about Islam, whether they're in the Western world regarding judgment about Islam, or whether in the Islamic world where we see what we would call a reductionist thinking, reducing it to the overt literal meaning, we have to ask, what was it like during the history of Islam? What was it like in all of these hundreds of years? Many, more than 1,000 years, almost 500 years. And what we noticed right away is that the Muslims were very anxious to adopt and integrate and understand and even advance the science of that time, whether it came from Greek culture, the Egyptian culture that existed at Alexandria, which was Greek culture plus whatever the earlier Babylonian influences had been, and of course the culture from the land of India, where there was a great development in mathematics and so forth. So you had the integration and synthesis of these cultures that led to scientific advances. So that was one point that interested me, is that Rumi, when our friend Zaki asked the question about the Astrolabe, I thought, this is marvelous because it touches upon several obvious let's say, little windows into just how diverse and interesting Islam was at that time. And the next point is Rumi's willingness to use the cosmology and scientific instrumentation of his day as a metaphor for spirituality. Something that already existed with the Ptolemaic universe. The Sufis adopted that. The Quran seems to have, in some verses, be referring to 7 heavens and so forth. So we understand that there is a model of the cosmos, but it's somewhat varietal and ambiguous in the Quran. There are some places where the earth is flat, some places where there are spheres. So there are different presentations. And so the Muslim scientists felt they had the right to investigate, and they were not persecuted. They freely investigated the science of the time. And the observations of the Ptolemaic universe would be what we would call experiential. They are what you would experience now. You're standing on the earth and you look out and you see the heavens revolving around you. So you wouldn't think that the planets are going around the sun. You would naturally be thinking the sun is rising, the sun is setting. The planets are rising, the planets are setting, etc. So the Ptolemaic universe is still valid as an experiential reality, and the Astrolabe worked in that context. The Astrolabe did not need to think about a heliocentric world to be functional. It would be able to tell you the time, and it would be able to tell you the altitude of a particular celestial body. And Rumi talks about the spider giving lessons. And what that's about is, I don't have an astrolabe here, but let's just consider there are different plates. And one of the more interesting plates on the astrolabe is called the rete, but in Arabic it's called the ankabut. And so if you look, if we look at astrolabes and we look at the Arabic pronunciation, which part of the astrolabe is it? Well, there appears to be a spider's web, which are the lines of latitude and longitude, we would say. But on top of this web, there's a spider that's moving. And what is the spider? It depends on the astrolabe. So that's also very interesting, and Rumi probably knew that some astrolabes had only, say, 6 or 8 or 10 stars and planets, and others had 25 or 30. And he would have found that interesting, given that he was using this metaphor, because the whole idea was that the stars and the planets were going to represent the divine names, and that individuals might be have the capacity for a more limited number of divine names or a greater number of divine names. So all of this, I think, is fascinating because it is proper, therefore. Rumi gives us the model of using the cosmology of your time as a metaphor. And as you know, in my case, I've tried to talk about the experience of Fanon, and the opening that one feels as comparable, say, to what we know about the black hole. Now, what do we know about the black hole? We know that it has such a powerful gravitation that it pulls in matter and it pulls in light, but we wouldn't know about the black hole except that it's emitting something. What is it emitting? It's emitting light, and it's emitting radiation. It's not only pulling in stuff and processing, but it's emitting stuff. So if you are in a culture and you're trying to find metaphors in your day, in the Quran God is using metaphors from all different time periods, and including, as I said, a flat world, a world with multiple heavens. And so what we want to grasp here is that, first of all, this helps us to better understand the Quran, which is God will use, as he says, any analogy that he needs to, even if it's as small as a gnat. He says he is not unwilling to use analogies. And so one problem arises already with literalism, is that if we must understand that God realizes in the Quran that in order to communicate with human beings, he's going to use the language they understand and the models of the world that they understand. And as I've explained to you, is what is going to be more and more difficult for the literalist is that the world of knowledge of human beings, as it expands through instrumentation, will be more and more of a challenge to the literalist, because it's not what the literalists think it is saying. So you'll get pseudoscience. Well, we've talked about this. They'll say, oh no, God actually meant that. Well, that's not true. It doesn't stand up to scientific inquiry. The only conclusion we can come to is that God, as he says, he's willing to use metaphors and analogies. Welcome to all of you who have just shown up. So the question about the astrolabe is an interesting one, and it provided us with these opportunities. And what I'm doing now is adding, I want to go further in this direction with you tonight, but I want to review some of the points that you understand why Rumi had taken such a strong interest in this, and even choosing a spelling of the astrolabe which is very unusual in Arabic. So what does he use? Which word does he use? Instead of Ustad, he uses Suturlab. So you will see this in Persian Arabic dictionary, and it's a rarer, much rarer form of the word. Why would he use that unless he's trying to indicate something? What I demonstrated through the use of numerology is that he wanted it to resonate with the divine name, the seeing, Basir. So God is seeing, and Basirat is key to understanding spirituality and reality. And not only that, as pointed out, it makes the of the ways that God asks Muhammad, peace be upon him, to make his path clear to people. One of them involves basir, basirat. What is it? Who knows this verse? Huh? We quoted, we talked to this. Yes, Faisal Jan.
قل هذه سبيلي أدعو إلى الله على بصيرة أنا ومن اتبعني.
Yeah. So قل هذه سبيلي. Say to them, O Muhammad, this is my way. Sabil means my path, my way, my tariq. This is my spiritual path. Tell the people what is your spiritual path. I will tell you what to say to them. Say to them that my path is to call you to God according to insight, in accordance with insight. Assalamu alaikum. And so this is very interesting. The whole verse is not very long, and it takes us from insight to a logic of why he is not an idolater or an associationist. Because whoever has insight will understand that multiplicity is a divine mercy. It's an expression of reality. And one is not confused at that level. One only becomes confused if, say, in the case of the duality the Sufis speak of, that they regard the same person who is speaking as being different from the hand of that person moving. So they view duality to be a problem of perception and therefore of vision. Rumi's poetry is very strong in emphasizing this element, vision. So again, قُلْ هَذِهِ سَبِيلِي أَدْعُو إِلَىٰ اللَّهِ عَلَىٰ بَصِيرَةٍ. I call you to God according to insight, vision, and specifically basirat refers to heart vision. But if we are going to invoke one of God's divine names, the only one that would match perfectly would be basir, the seeing, whether it's internal seeing or external seeing, all seeing would belong to God. And Rumi, who is a master abjadist, like Ibn Arabi and the others, he would realize that he had an opportunity if he used this rare spelling in Arabic. Remember, it's a Greek word brought into Arabic language, and it's there brought in as Ustad more commonly, and more rarely as Suturlab. And he's using Suturlab because it has the exact abjad of Basir, which is what? 302. So he doesn't use Ustadlab because that would be 303, and he could not make that association. Now, today, and at times I was saying, where do we? There's so many places in the Quran where we find out about Sabil, and I was explaining this verse about the mercy, because tonight what we want to look at is what happens in the absence of insight, or what is the relationship of the absence of insight to ignorance. And so, of the verses regarding the mercy, there's the one I often like to quote: وَمَنْ يَعَشُ عَنْ ذِكْرِ الرَّحْمَنِ نُقَيِّضْ لَهُ شَيْطَانًا فَهُوَ لَهُ قَرِينٌ. And then he goes on to say, وَإِنَّهُمْ لَيَسَدُونَ Anne e sabile. So he says that in this verse he says, whoever withdraws from the mercy, God will appoint for them, will assign to them a Satan, and this will be his or her companion. وَمَنْ يَعْشُ عَنْ ذِكْرِ الرَّحْمَنِ نُقَيِّضْ لَهُ شَيْطَانًا فَهُوَ لَهُ قَرِينٌ. Adding to this, in the next verse, he says, إِنَّهُمْ لَيَسَدُونَهُمْ عَنْ سَبِيلِ. So So he's saying that, and because of this, they will be barred, they will be blocked from the sabil, from the correct way. So in this verse, what we see is the idea that the mercy is in all cases going to be a refuge, and whoever doesn't take this refuge is going to be left with losing their way. So, for example, in another verse, God says, وَمَا يَأْتِهِمْ مِنْ ذِكْرٍ مِنِ رَحْمَنِ مُدَّهْسٍ إِلَّا كَانُوا عَنْهُ مُرِدِينَ or muridun. So he says, and there does not stop coming to them reminders of the merciful, except that they keep turning away from them. So there's the idea of the reminders can be from both directions. So in the case of the second verse, the reminders are coming from God of the mercy. So everywhere you look, you should see reminders of the mercy. The case of the first one, it could be either way. Either the person has withdrawn and is turning away from the reminders of God's mercy, or within themselves they are turning away from the mercy in themselves, and therefore they have the wrath, and they will have Satan as appointed to them. Meaning they will have a demon as their companion. This demon is none other than themselves. It isn't necessarily the case of some kind of demonic possession. It's a very ordinary experience that most human beings have. That whenever they withdraw from the mercy, they find themselves at a loss. They find themselves in trouble, actually, because they're giving way to a Satan, which says, I am better, I am right, and so forth. So in this conversation we had last time about the astrolabe, it's a very interesting conversation. As I said, it's a scientific instrument of the time. It would be as if today somebody would say the heart is the Hubble telescope. It would be exactly like that. And if you clear the eye of the heart, you will be able to see the galaxies, you will be able to see all of the stars being formed, you will be able to see pulsars and stars disintegrating, and all of these are the divine names, because for Rumi, from the beginning to the end, the stars often represent the divine names. So the astrolabe, what specifically, in most cases, are people trying to ascertain? In most cases, they're trying to ascertain the time, and they happen to know the star that they are seeing. And so they can hold the astrolabe, and they can turn a lever on one side of it, called the alidade. It's really a lever, and they're holding it. The wonderful thing about the astrolabe is that it's using gravity. Now, some of you may know that I teach celestial navigation, and some people, like Zaki, they've been in my class. I don't know if any of you were in my navigation class or not. But in celestial navigation, we are using the horizon. We're using the horizon, and we are using a sextant, and we are shooting the stars to find out our position. But the wonderful thing about the astrolabe is that it's using gravity. So the gravity is pulling the astrolabe, obviously, towards the earth. It's staying level. So as long as you can stay still, it will be level. And therefore, if you bring it up to your eye level, you can trust that, in a sense, gravity is keeping what you are sighting in any tangent to the Earth's surface, or frankly, any slice going through the Earth's surface down to the center of the Earth, you see? So in a sense, you have a sextant. You have an instrument for determining altitude, and the astrolabe, what Rumi's more interested in is the stars. So he would be interested in being the Ibn al-Waqt. What's Ibn al-Waqt?
Son of time.
Yeah, the son of the moment. So being in the present moment. And in the present moment for Rumi is an important thing. Doesn't he say that all of your self-consciousness comes from remembering what is behind or forward. Am I right in this poem? So he's talking about the inability to escape personhood, the inability to escape the fetters of the self, because one is preoccupied with what is past or with what is in the future. Am I right? So, hast hushari ze yad ma maza mazi o mustaqbalat pardai khuda. Right? So he says, self-awareness, it is because it arises from what is past. Meaning on your mind, there's so many things in the past. Even your identity, probably. But certainly the thoughts of even yesterday or the week before, but so much from the past. But then he adds something in the next line. He says, Ma'zi o mustaqbalat pardei khuda. So he says, what is past and what is in the future have become the veil of God. So clearly to be Ibn al-Waqt means to be centered in the present moment, and you are now a kind of space traveler just by being centered in the present moment. So if you are centered in the present moment, you could use the astrolabe. Because one of the conditions of using the astrolabe is that you know the time, in which case you could find the altitude of the star you're interested in. Remind me, what are the stars and the planets for Rumi?
Divine names.
They're the divine names. So you are traveling and you are in the present moment, and for the first time you can use the astrolabe because you are in the present moment. If you were in the past moment or the future moment, you couldn't use it. But you are in the present moment, and so you know the present moment, and therefore you're able to let the spider... What's the spider? The spider is a strange part, one of the discs of the astrolabe. It looks like a spider, especially going across the web made up of the lines of latitude and longitude. And so the spider is moving because you know the time, and because you know the time and you're centered in the moment, you turn the astrolabe to the moment in time that you're in. And when you do that, you then take the planet that you're interested in. Let's say that it was the merciful. And you would, meaning it's a star, but for Rumi is using this as an analogy, and you would take the spider and you would turn it at that moment to correspond. See, so the astrolabe has two sides. So you've got the alidate, and you're pointing. It's been pointed for you because you know the time. So you use, on the other side, you've moved the spider, and you've moved this planet into position, and now you read the astrolabe, and it says, it is at such and such an altitude, meaning you will find it. All you have to do now is look in that direction. So Rumi is, for very good reasons, using the astrolabe to represent the heart and its ability to see God. Okay? And so even though we don't have, maybe one day I'll bring a cardboard astrolabe in and we can look at this together. But it's a scientific instrument of the time, and it would be equivalent to somebody today talking, using the scientific knowledge of our day and using that as a metaphor for the action of the spiritual consciousness and the heart.